Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski. Today we're back in Western Pennsylvania with somebody who's grown up there, went to university there, coached there, and retired there. So a long-running career in Western Pennsylvania, a teammate of mine for a while. Please welcome today on the podcast, Timothy McVeagh. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Matt. How are you today?
I'm great. Let's tell everybody your origin story. How, when, and where did you first become a runner?
Unlike many of the other people that you've talked to, I listened to Sam, I listened to Paul, I listened to Dave Thompson, and a lot of those guys were involved in a lot of sports. I was cut from Little League twice as a 12 and a 13-year-old. I was also cut twice from the St. Bede grade school basketball team. I think I was a runner, not an athlete per se. I did try out for high school football. I was a 140-pound weak side tackle. That lasted for about 2 weeks. I actually made the team. There were 120 some guys tried out, and 86 of us made the team. But I was just playing because everybody else was playing. And so I quit. And as soon as I got home, I felt really bad about quitting. So I decided that I was going to get involved in something else real fast. There were two teams that I could get involved with. There was kicking this white and black ball up and down the field and trying to get it into a net, which I had never played before. And then there was this run, cross-country team. So I figured I can run. I went up to the coach and asked him if I could join the team. That's how my running career started.
What year was that, and where were you exactly?
That would have been 1969, and I would have been a ninth grader at Pittsburgh Central Catholic High School.
What was it like? Your first practice, your first run, your first coach?
It was interesting because the coach had one of the other teammates take me out for a run. We were by ourselves, and he had an older brother who was previously on the team but had graduated. And so I guess he had some more familiarity with what it was. He took me out on a 6-mile run through Shenley Park the first time I had ever been involved. And I hung right in there with him. And I think I surprised him. I think he tried to bury me, but I felt pretty good about my first day experience. As far as the coaching was concerned, I absolutely loved the guy. He was also an alum. The previous legendary coach, who was also my art teacher, retired from the coaching part, but continued to teach art at Central up until 1996, where I'll humbly say I took his place as the art teacher. I didn't really take his place. He was a tremendous motivator, and very understandable why he had such great cross-country teams as well. But this was one of his runners who had graduated in 1965 and came back to Central to teach and coach. He was part of the tradition.
What was the reputation and status of Central Catholic's running program at that point in 1969?
I would say it was pretty stellar up until that point. Now, when Terry McCoy took over, the cupboard was a little bit bare. He didn't really get a bunch of thoroughbreds to work with. It was a little bit lean for my first couple of years there as a 10th grader running the Gannon Invitational. I was amongst a herd of North Allegheny runners. I was fortunate enough to win the race, but the next 5 or 6 guys were from North Allegheny, and then our second man was maybe number 7 in the race. There were 3 10th graders on the varsity at that time. That sort of shows how it was a little bit lean. Typically, you earned your stripes, and by the time you were a junior or a senior, you were on the varsity team. So it was highly unusual for 3 10th graders to be in the top 7 at that point.
On your first run, you said, hey, I hung with this guy. I feel pretty good about that. How long did it take before you said, hey, I'm a runner and I am good at this?
They had the Catholic League championships at the end of the season. There were 3 races. There was a varsity, a junior varsity, and a freshman race. I got the 10th place trophy. I got the last trophy in the freshman race. That was the first trophy I'd ever gotten in my life. And I held on to it for a long time. 50 years now, that's probably, I'm not sure where it is. I think that was part of it, and that I was in the top 10 ninth graders. We were in the Catholic League at that time. So we were not a part of the WPIAL. We had our own championships, Catholic League championships. And there were a number of Catholic schools at the time. But we competed in invitationals with most of the teams in the WPIAL.
What about your views on competition at that age, 14, 15 and going on? Getting cut from teams, you had to deal with that for your own self-esteem and self-image. How competitive were you among your own team and with other people?
I always said that I never really loved to run. I like to beat people. That was the motivation. In my 9th grade year, I was the 5th runner on the team. I ran by myself all summer to get ready for that fall cross country team. Now, we had a track season in between there, and I was only one of 2 freshmen that participated in the indoor track. I wanted to be involved. A lot of kids were, I guess they were playing basketball or doing something else, but we had an indoor track program. So I got on the bus with one other freshman and all the varsity runners, and we used to drive out to South Park, to Schoonamaker Hall. It's legendary. It was a dirt barn that they rolled with a steamroller, and it was 12 laps to a mile, and it wasn't even quite a mile when you were finished. And they always had to have an intermission in the invitationals to let the dust settle down. It was hard to breathe in there. After that, I realized that I was probably a better track runner than cross-country runner. I think I ran around low 5 minutes, 5:04, 5:0 something as a 9th grader. And that's what motivated me to do the summer running.
Coaching? You said you were running by yourself.
The summer was by myself. I say that because as a coach, I continued what the previous coaches did and had an organized summer program for all runners. Jim Lear, who's an alum of IUP and coached at Central, at Duquesne, at Pitt places. As a fact, Central Catholic, I think, might have the record for the most IUP recruits, sending runners up to Coach Sutton and Coach Fry at IUP. I think there's 5 or 6 of us that went there. So we continued the tradition along with to keep things going from a recruiting standpoint.
What was your best successes through your whole high school career?
2 things. We won the Catholic state championship my senior year. Now, again, we didn't go to the WPIAL or the PIAA meet, but we were 3-2 against North Allegheny, who was the favorite to win the PIAA meet, and 5-0 against Penn Hills, who actually won the PIAA meet that year. So I thought that was a telling thing about our program there. I was chasing the school record in the mile most of my time at Central. I ended up with that my junior year, and then lowered it a little bit my senior year. But it wasn't long lasting. There was a sophomore coming up that got that record 2 years later.
Your attitude and motivator that you like to beat people. What was your relationship with the other teams, Penn Hills, North Allegheny runners? Did you get to know them? Were there friendships? How were those rivalries?
I don't think that there really weren't friendships until after high school. Then some of those guys became your teammates in college. The friendships were established then, but it was a love-hate relationship in terms of, you had respect for a lot of these guys, and that's probably why you wanted to beat them, because you had this genuine respect for them.
What kind of student were you, and at what point did you think this is something I'm going to keep doing after high school?
I was an average student. In reality, when I graduated from high school, my path originally was to go to Virginia and study to be a cabinet maker. My father was a professor at the community college at the time. He asked me to try the community college first before going on and doing the cabinet making thing. He must have mentioned to Neil Cohen, who was the athletic director at the time. Neil came to our house and also motivated me to come try the academics there and run for the community college cross country team, track team. And I accepted that challenge.
Who was there then? That was about 72 or 1973. Who was there?
That was Sam Baer's first year as the coach, I believe. The top dog was probably Paul Stemmer. And Brian Hodge, I think I remember that name. I don't recall many of the other guys. They had quite a crew of people there. I was number 14 in that group. The team won the National Junior College Championship that year. There was one guy, John Jennings, who was from Philadelphia, who had run 4:12 in high school. He was brought in. So I knew that it was a stellar group. And I'm not even sure John was in the top 7 at the time. If he was, it might have been 5, 6, or 7. It wasn't one of those top 3 or 4 spots, I don't believe.
What was your training mileage? How did it change from high school there with Allegheny, and how did you adjust?
Yeah, interesting enough, we used to practice at 12 o'clock every day. So you had to be finished class. We loaded up in the vans and we went out to Butler Community College and ran on that campus. I remember being able to do all the work that was asked of me to do at the time. But after a year of that, I wasn't able to schedule my classes to fit the training at school, and I stopped running. So I did not run my sophomore year there.
You are on the team picture from the first year, and it's a big gang.
Yes, big gang. I lived at home. Most of those guys lived up on the hill on the north side. I think they took up a whole apartment building.
Neil Cohen knew your father. You met him before you went there. What's your impressions of Neil Cohen, who's not with us anymore?
I like Neil. Neil had the gift of gab. He could talk you into pretty much anything. He loved the sport. I think he truly loved the sport. I think he liked the opportunity of providing people a stepping stone for the next step. And he took pride in that. As Sam said, a lot of guys came to him who were struggling prior to going there or struggling somewhere else, and they came there for a little while and went on to do some great things. But yeah, I had a good relationship with Sam and Neil. Even after I left, I'd see the team at meets that IUP would go to. He would always come over and talk to me. And he was proud of the fact that runners from his program were involved in other programs, that they were continuing on with their running.
How about your family support? What did they think when you stopped running and gave academics and school priority?
They supported me in making that decision. I had come on as an art major, and a lot of my art classes had studio time or lab time with them. So they were like 3 hours long. You could only get one in the morning and try to go to practice at 12 o'clock. I really did need the afternoons to get my associate's degree. Also, I discovered the pot shop at CCAC. It was an old automotive training building that the school had acquired, and they had turned it into a pottery studio. I wandered in there one day after class and decided to take that class the second semester of my freshman year, and I'm still making pots today.
All right, let's talk about your relationship with anything at IUP before you went there, and then how you made that decision upon finishing your associate's degree.
It was a very good art and art education institution. It was close by. It had a reasonable cost. I decided to go there based on being an art major. I didn't run. I was running, but I happened to be running one day down past the Rustic Lodge, and this guy comes up behind me and asked if he could join me on the run. I said, sure. It turned out to be Danny Friedrich. We went out for a run, and he actually is the one that talked me back into running again. I think that was his last year there. And I knew him from high school because we had a dual meet against Bethel Park, and he won. So I knew Dan before. And as you know, Dan, a really happy-go-lucky, friendly guy, probably not a mean bone in his body. He's the one that got me back into running. I joined the team as a track runner that spring.
And what was the difference in training at IUP and coaching with Ed Fry, Sutton, as opposed to Sam Bear? What was the training, scheduling, and community like?
As far as practice was concerned, it was at like 4:30. So that worked out very well for my schedule. My class time was probably done by 3 o'clock or so. The training part was very similar. You had distance runs, and then we had the dreaded intervals twice a week. We would jog up to the golf course or wherever we were going to run the intervals, get ourselves ready for whatever Ed had in store for us. After we finished, pride in the fact that we were able to successfully complete one of his workouts, and then we would all go get changed and go to dinner together. It was a great, great environment. I had two lives at IUP. I had the athlete life, and then I had the artist life. And I was heckled on both ends. No, I'll laugh out loud. It wasn't anything. I was the artsy fartsy guy down and then I was the jock in the art building. So I led these two different lives up there that actually I've continued all the way up until I retired. I was involved with athletics and art for the rest of my life.
Let's talk about IUP years. At what point did you look at what you could accomplish and get the return to, I want to beat people? How competitive were you? And how long did that take?
I obviously started out, I wanted to make the top 7. That's every cross-country runner's goals, to make the top 7. I knew that there was quality individuals there, and I wasn't going to just walk in there and be a top 7 runner. I remember staying up there in the summer after that track season and training with the guys that had stayed up there. One being Paul Martin, and we were putting in our miles. I also had an art thing going there. The professor of ceramics asked me to be the shop boy at his studio way out on 6th Street Extension. So I was up there for art and athletics for the summer, getting ready for that fall season. And that's really what allowed me, I think, to ultimately be a part of that team that particular season. I don't remember as much after listening to Paul talk about that season. I don't remember the things that he remembers. I have a more vivid memory of the next season, which was my 5th year that I had up there.
I want to talk about the PSAC League. Allegheny was super successful. That time it was Edinburgh and a couple other schools. What was your impression of the Edinburgh program? Did you know those guys?
I did not know them personally. Certainly you had to respect the program. Doug Watts was a tremendous recruiter. He had a knack for finding guys in remote places that were probably not very well trained, that had a lot of talent, and that he knew what to do with them when they came to his place, and he got that ball rolling there. We actually at Central, for a number of years, sent our boys up to Doug's summer camp at Edinburgh. That was for a week of training up there. Loaded up the vans, had them sign up, go up there and experience. That was a little bit, maybe a week before the official district season started. So I had a relationship with Doug Watts after college, more after college than during college.
What was your best successes and memories then of your IUP career?
My failure is what led to my success, in the sense that I was a miler and I ran in the PAC championship race in the mile, ran 4:16 and got dusted pretty much because Mark Muggleton had 49 400 speed and I had 52 400 speed. At that point, I realized that if I wanted to score points for the team or be successful at the finish line, I had to move up. So I moved up to the 5,000 the next year and finished 5th in the 5,000 at the college state meet, scored some points for our team and was pretty happy. I think I ran 14:56 that day. So I was pretty happy with the performance. And that's an experience that I used with our athletes at Central. After a season of running the 100 and 200, I'd have to pull a kid aside and tell him as a 10th grader, he's now a 400 runner. And then after 10th grade, he saw me coming over and I said, now you're an 800 runner. And they screamed and cried about it. But that one particular guy that we had on the team at that point started out as a 100 runner, ran 156 or 157 to qualify for the state meet his junior year in the 800. So that's what you do when you recognize what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then you adjust your event to what those are and to assure yourself a better chance of having success. Because success is what really keeps you motivated.
Let's talk about a quick snapshot of your outlook on the running world. You're pretty busy, passionate about art, leading the two lives. What about the bigger world of running? Certainly the teams are all talking about what's going on in the world of running. Were you paying attention to the world of running at the national level or international level watching that? Were you a fan of the sport?
Most of the time, when I watched a track meet or something on television, it's because I was going through the channels and it happened to be there. And so if I saw it there, I was interested in it. I became very interested in high school athletics and coaching. And that's where my focus was pretty much all the time. I think I only ran one road race in my life after college. I ran the LB's distance run because I was in Wheeling, West Virginia. That was my first coaching job at Lindsley School in Wheeling, West Virginia. I did high school, college, and coaching all in the 70s, according to the title of your podcast. I decided that it was too hard to try to train and be involved in a lot of other things. So I pretty much focused on high school art and high school cross country and track.
That's kind of great. There's not that many people that we meet that have passion by age 14 for two things and follow it through for the next 50 years.
Yeah, I was very fortunate that my parents supported me as the idea of being an art major. And I made some decisions through that. I decided not necessarily to be a practicing artist for a living. At my 5th year of school, I got a teaching certificate, did what was necessary so that I could teach school and coach and still do art more for fun as opposed for profit.
Tim, you mentioned that you went to West Virginia right after university for your first position. A bit away from home, not off the geographic map. When did you get back to Pittsburgh, and how was it that you ended back where you went to school?
Lindsley was a military school previous to me arriving there. They had just made a transformation to a boys' prep school. It was an interesting thing. I actually got that job because of Jim Nagel, another Central guy, went to IUP, was an art major, coached at Kiski School, and Reno Diorio was the assistant to the headmaster at Kiski School and was taking this new position down at Lindsley as the headmaster. And I guess Reno must have asked Jim if he knew anybody. He needed an art teacher down there. And Jim knew I was just graduating from IUP, and we made the connection. I think it was more out of necessity that I interviewed great or anything like that. This is what the guy needed. I provided that, and he offered me the job. That's how I ended up there at Lindsley through an IUP connection. Once I got there, I saw the writing on the wall pretty quickly. It was a 7-day boarding school. I had to be there every other weekend to take care of the boarders. My apartment was attached to the dormitory. So when the other faculty member who had duty that night left for the night and didn't put everybody to bed like they were supposed to, that became my responsibility. And that got old really fast. The other thing I saw was my starting salary there was $8,600, plus room and board. You didn't need money for rent. You didn't need money for food. They took care of you. But you just made enough money to do a few things for yourself. But a lot of people were trapped there. You could see that. You really couldn't get ahead. And I guess that's okay. If you love what you're doing, they're taking care of you. And I did all that. I loved what I was doing. They were taking care of me. But I also wanted to get ahead. I knew after the first year that it was going to be short-lived. but I wasn't going to leave after 1 year. I didn't want people to think that I couldn't do the job, because I could do the job. So I stayed a second year, and they made me some pretty good increases in salary. I went from 86, I think it was 11,400. I was, offered for my third year there. I said, you're going to have to make me an offer that I can't refuse. And they said that was the best offer. But I don't think it really had anything to do with the money, because I just knew that I wasn't going to be happy there for very much longer. And I didn't want to leave with a bad taste in my mouth. I wanted to leave after having a good experience. So I left. And it wasn't the money, because when I came back to Pittsburgh, I had no job at all. I actually signed up to wait tables at the Grand Concourse restaurant on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sunday nights. That was the job, because I didn't think I was a public school kind of guy. I liked the freedom that was given me at Central and at Lindsley. I also taught 2 years at Shadyside Academy shortly after coming back to Pittsburgh, but I didn't have that job right away. And there was a little more freedom there that I treasured.
What about your personal passion for art and running? What was the state of those two things through these first couple transition years?
My second year at Lindsley, I was talked into running the Boston Marathon by Paul Martin and Kim Burke and a lot of those guys that were going up that year. I remember running some 20 milers with them to get ready for it. That was the 1980 marathon. I think I ran the LB's distance race. That was the one and only road race I ever ran in my life, because I was in Wheeling, and I think that's what everybody expected me to do. I did get beat by the women runners. Unlike Paul said, Patty Lyons beat me at Boston, and she also beat me at the LB's run. That was shortly after Boston too, that LB's run. That was pretty much my last competitive racing. When I came back to Pittsburgh, I was offered an opportunity at Carnegie Mellon University, again, to be the shop boy. I was mixing clay and glazes for the students there. And in exchange, I had all my materials, a space in the studio, and I was free to do my work when I wasn't being involved as shop boy. I did that for 2 or 3 years, I believe. And then on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, I was waiting tables. And I only stopped that job because I was contacted by Shadyside Academy at the time. They knew of my whereabouts because after I had pretty much accepted the job at Lindsley, Phil Joyce asked me to come to Shadyside for an interview. And at the end of the day, they offered me a job too. That one was $9,600. No room and board with that job. But they wanted me to do the yearbook. When you work at private schools, there's some fine print at the end of the contract and anything else that we want you to do. They wanted me to do the yearbook, and Lindsley wanted me to coach. And I had already given my word to Reno. So that's why I ended up going to Lindsley for those first 2 years. But what happened was the guy that offered me the job had a heart issue, and they needed a sub until he recovered. So I stayed there for 6 months while he was recovering. And at the end of the school year, the other teacher who got the job that I turned down wanted to go for her master's degree at IUP, nonetheless. So I filled in for her for the second year. And that second year I was there is when Jim Lear decided to leave Central and go to Mercersburg Academy. So one of my high school teammates and I took the coaching job at Central for cross country and track. We spent 4 years together. Bill Cabot was he was the head coach. I was the assistant at the time. He was an attorney, and then eventually received a corporate job at U.S. Steel that didn't allow him to do this anymore. That's when I took over the reins as the coach at Central, but I was not teaching then.
Let me ask you about your starting at coaching. Let's look at it by the time you reach Central. How confident and competent were you as a coach? Coming from being just a middle distance runner, how competent were you and how confident were you with that running that program?
As we had good coaches at IUP, and I had good coaches in high school. And when I was at Lindsley, I was coaching cross country in the distance runners, but the head coach of the track team there, I tried to learn from those around me. I was able to pick up what was necessary, the basics, which is what really a high school kid needs to get started into an event. And then if they needed something further, at Central, I had the opportunity to send them over to get some help from some of the coaches at CMU. Dario Donatelli, who was the Central guy, the assistant track and cross country coach at CMU at the time, he went to college there, spent his whole career there. And then after retiring at CMU, even though he was younger than me, I was envious. He came and helped me at Central for a couple of years. I felt pretty good about the experiences that I had. I used basic formulas to try to keep kids on the right path. But I think the most important thing to know as a high school coach is don't ruin the kid.
Don't break anything, right?
Yeah. Leave something in the tank for the next guy. Don't try to exhaust everything that the kid has. And I followed that pretty much my entire time at Central to try to leave something in the tank. I would come up with a workout. I would hedge on too little rather than too much. I thought that was a way to keep kids healthy and keep them interested. That's what I subscribe to as a coach. I picked up a couple of things. I was the quote unquote throwing coach one year because I didn't have a throwing coach at Central that year. And our kid was the WPIL champion in the javelin. And but I will tell you, I subscribe to I'll take genetics over coaching anytime. This kid had what it took to be a javelin thrower. It really was just a matter of make sure he doesn't get hurt. I would hire athletes from CMU as my assistants. So I'd get a throwing coach and a pole vault coach from Carnegie Mellon as assistants. They could earn some money on the side, and then they could talk to the kids about the things that I didn't really know or understand.
How did that attitude that you talked about of erring on the side of a little bit less, no injury, leave stuff in the tank, how did that gel with your earlier competitive, I like to beat people attitude?
I probably didn't really understand that as an athlete because I wasn't responsible for myself. My coach was responsible, so I needed to do whatever they asked me to do. I knew that if you pushed to the edge, that you were going to get a little more out of the kid. But you also ran the risk of him getting injured and then him having nothing. I wasn't willing to take that chance for somebody else's future. I didn't think that was fair to do that. And so I never did.
What happened with the status of the Catholic school leagues, WPIAL and PIAA, over the years? And what do you think of the separation there?
That all happened while I was in college. The Central Catholic and the Catholic schools in Pittsburgh, not in Philadelphia, no, they stayed out much longer time. Joined the WPIL in the mid-70s while I was in college. By the time I was back at Central was already in the WPIL. We competed with the other schools in the tri-state area. I think originally the PIA wanted to include Central with District 8, which was the City League, which is actually what they did later on with Philadelphia, Catholic League and City League. They combined those. I think we turned that down. I think we wanted to be in with the suburban schools or not at all, especially for the big three, football, baseball, and basketball. The city league was beginning, it still had, but in those sports, it was struggling. The track for sure in the city league was strong into the 90s and early 2000s. There were guys like Joe DeFury, who coached at Peabody High School. He had great relay teams. I think he won the city championship 23 years in a row. He was able to put great teams together. He was the javelin thrower at Central, but he loved the 400. They competed with the big boys at the PIAA meet. I think they ran 740 something in the 4x8. He had some great teams. And after he retired from that, I actually brought him on to help me at Central. I was pretty good at recruiting good coaches to help me out.
What do you think his attitude was about genetics versus coaching? It's hard to trust genetics for 23 years.
I think he knew what to look for and recruited within the building and brought those kids out for track. I think he subscribed to that as well. It's pretty hard to beat genetics. I did that all the time. I went to the freshman basketball tryouts all the time, sat in the stands, watched for the athletic kids could jump, kids who were doing the sprints fast, all of those things. And I used to put up a big display between the first and second floor of Central, talking about all the NFL players that ran track and to try to get kids, as many kids out, because numbers does help. When you have more numbers, you have a bigger gene pool and you can be successful that way.
You don't have to mention names. Did you have any kids that failed or lost or disappointed that was especially strong that you had to coach through?
When I finished coaching, I was pretty happy with that statistic. I would say well over 90% of the kids that had talent were able to bring that talent to fruition and have successful high school careers. There might only be two guys that I felt bad about. There was probably more than that, but most of them, it was the result of an injury or something that came about, asthma, or something that prevented them from being the best athlete that they could be. I remember a kid that he was a phenom, but he developed exercise-induced asthma.
Wow.
It was crushing. He was the best eighth grader in the entire tri-state area and decided to come to Central, had a great freshman year, and then developed this exercise-induced asthma and struggled. But you know what? He stuck with it the entire time and never quit. That in itself is a tremendous life lesson. I'm sure that carried him far and well into life, having to deal with that struggle.
You have teammates from university days that went into coaching also. Some of them kept running. You stopped competitive running fairly early at that high level. At this age, there's heart problems, there's new knees, new hips. What are your reflections on your career and then your transition out of coaching? How did you handle that?
That's interesting you say that. My knees are good, and I think it's because I stopped early. I did have open heart surgery. It'll be 3 years in September. But I think it was more of genetics than anything else. I developed a heart murmur in my early 60s that turned out to be mitral valve regurgitation. I was very fortunate to hook up with, I'm going to say this on tape, a UPMC physician that actually sent me to the Cleveland Clinic for the surgery. He knew they were the best in the country at doing what I needed. And I'm forever grateful for him to making that decision. to allow me to do that. I have no regrets of giving up the competitive aspect, because the rewards of coaching and running with the kids were far greater for me. We were very fortunate to have successes early that were able to carry us for a long time. Those first 3 years at Central with Billy Cabot, my close friend, we won 3 out of 4 WPIL cross-country championships, and had two state runner-up teams in that first 4 years, which allowed to plant the seed for when he left. I had 39th graders come out for cross country. Our team was well over 50 kids. And of the 30, 13 stuck around, and they ended up winning the PIAA state championship their senior year. Probably one of my proudest moments, putting those medals around those 8 kids' necks. Once that happens, you're hungry for another one, which we never got, but it was always the goal. And I think that was a great seed to be planted in amongst the kids. It finally got to the point where my old school ways were way different than what's happening now. And the athletes and the coach were on different planets. So I gave up coaching before I gave up teaching, because I think they needed a different approach. I was pretty much stuck in my ways. I made some adjustments along the way, but at that point, I think whatever needed to happen, I couldn't provide. I had about 38 years of coaching at Central, and a couple years previous to that, high school, and 2 years coaching at Duquesne. I was pretty happy with the way it all turned out. I'd do it all again the same way.
You have pretty good self-awareness, self-assessment, and attitude. I don't know how much of that comes from, what do you think, informing your personality? Are you more an artist? Are you more a runner? Or are you more a coach? How does that all blend?
That's a very good question. I think I was a coach that taught rather than a teacher that coached, because actually I coached in the classroom. I used the same techniques that I had done for the 12 years previous as only a coach at Central. I carried those right into the classroom. I'd say that first and foremost, I was a coach. And second and foremost, I was a teacher. And third and foremost, I was an artist. And I was okay with setting my art aside, but I always maintained a connection to it. Tomorrow night, I'll go to the Manchester Craftsman's Guild and make pots for 3 hours. I always sign up for their adult nighttime education class so that I can keep my craft sharp. Until my hands can't do it anymore, I'll just keep doing it.
Have you become a fan of racing through the coaching then because of the kids? Or are you following the sport now?
When I stopped coaching, I stepped back for a while. I went incognito to a couple of cross-country races because my youngest daughter was running for Shadyside Academy, where my wife coached. I just went with a hoodie on and sunglasses and just tried to stay out of the Central coach's way and just let them adjust to their things. Last spring, I started going back to some races. There were some kids at Central that I had heard about that had an opportunity to qualify for states or were chasing down records that were set back when I was coaching. The one boy did get the 800-meter record that was from 1993. I put the new record holder and the old record holder together in a connection. That's really a great thing. While I was at Central, the shot put record went down, and that was from 1969. And I believe that Steve Mitchell broke it in the early 2000s. That record holder got a hold of his number and called him up to congratulate him. Those are great things. And that's what records are for, to be broken. And so it was actually one of my motivations, because my entire career as coaching, Mark Studnicki, who had broken the record that I had at Central, held it all the way up until the mid 2000s. So I wasn't going to quit until I got the record back by coaching the kid that got it. And yeah, we had a kid run 410, 411, 1600 meter, won the WPL championships twice. He and his brother, Scott, and this was Jeff Van Kooten. Again, I'll take genetics over coaching anytime. Those two boys, one was the 3,200 meter champion his junior and senior year, and the other was the 1,600 meter champion his junior and senior year. Great kids. I actually have an interesting story. When Scott was in high school, he hadn't run cross country, but he came out for track. We were going to a track meet up in Erie, PA, and he was supposed to run the mile, but he got there late. He had just come off a swimming season, as his sister was a great swimmer. She swam, I believe, at the Air Force Academy. So I said, you know what, there's not enough time for you to warm up. I'm going to go to the meet director and see if I can get you into the 3,200. We already have a couple guys in there, but I'll tell him what happened, and I think he'll be okay with it. The guy did let Scott run the 3,200 meter, and I had two other 10th graders in there that were really quite good. Scott ends up beating one of them and almost beating the other one in the race. And his mom was sitting leaning up against the fence. And I went up to her and I said, Mrs. Van Kooten, I have some bad news for you. And she was like, what? She didn't understand. I said, I know you think your son is the swimmer that runs. He's not. He's a runner that swims. And yeah, he ended up having a great career along with his younger brother later on. And they're two classic examples of genetics.
That's a great story. Yeah. I don't know if I'll put this in. I've started this podcast just from being associated with some running in the 70s myself and talking about the transitions everybody goes through and how we transition out of competition into other parts of life. And you've listened to a couple of the podcasts from people that you knew. What would you like to hear? Where can this podcast go? I am going to be talking to an Olympic medalist later today, and I don't want to focus on elite runners, but what's the value in this kind of podcast and talking about this? Your story's great. I think this life arc of somebody who passed through the 70s in whatever capacity of running, that's the stories that I'm interested in.
Yeah, as soon as I watched the Paul Martin podcast, as soon as it was over, I looked on my phone for his contact and I didn't have it. So I sent a message to Danny Friedrich. Do you have a contact for Paul Martin? 3 minutes later, I got a phone number. I made the phone call and I talked to Paul Martin for at least an hour. And that in itself is the value of your podcast. And I heard things on the podcast that I never knew before. I didn't understand that, I'm going to call them struggles of Paul in high school and in college and making all these decisions and all the things that were going through his mind at the time to be the first college graduate in his family. That's amazing. And I spent time with, I had no idea. That was enlightening for me as far as those kinds of things are concerned. I see that, and seeing Sam Baer on there, it was interesting because I had very close connections with Dave Thompson. Was my roommate in college, a tremendous guy, always made it a point when he was officiating or helping out at a track meet to come see me and talk to me about what was going on with him and his kids and his family. The connection with Sam Baer, although I only ran there for a year, I had tremendous respect for the program. Unlike what he said, I'm not sure we hated them. I'm not sure those people hated them. I think they were envious of, what they had. They did a good job bringing the right people aboard. Again, genetics was key to that program. They got some of the best runners in the world for that program at the time, and were able to bring them to fruition and have those kind of successes. So yeah, I'm happy that you're doing this, and it's been a tremendous thing for me personally, because I can make a connection. I think I can make a connection with a lot of Kevin Foley was one of your. I did see the picture that he posted. Yeah, so that was Kenosha, Wisconsin, and he's up in the front, I believe, in that poster. If you look about 10 or 15 guys back, you'll see me on there. Because I have that poster. Somebody sent that to me because I was in it. I didn't finish in that spot. I finished a little bit behind there in that spot. It's really pretty neat in my retirement to be able to reminisce about that particular period. I think it would be valuable to runners today to see the kinds of things that runners of the 70s were doing and how they carried it on for 50 more years. Bob Costello coaching for all that time.
This is great. I think a lot of people will enjoy hearing your story. The same. Yeah, I'm sure that the people you mentioned, if they get to hear it, will enjoy the reminiscing you did, and also that outlook and finding out your life story. Of course, I had the same experience with everybody I talked to. Some of the people I know, some of the people I don't. They're full of surprises, and the inner motivations and the twists and turns in all our lives are fascinating. I get surprises all the time. So your life story is great. It's inspirational. You've had a giant impact on a lot of people in the kids, and that's something that I appreciate. I think everybody appreciates and can relate to.
Yeah, I'm very humbled and grateful to have had the opportunity to spend that time with those kids and hopefully influence their lives. And I did that because when I was a kid, guys like Terry McCoy, Ed Fry, they did that for me. And that was my motivation for wanting to do that for somebody else. That's why I stuck with it as long as I did, until it was obvious that my methods weren't going to work anymore, or weren't going to be influential anymore. Because I always tell people, I came to Central in 1969 as a 14-year-old, and I don't think I ever really left. And I definitely never quit again.
That's great. It's been fun doing this. I talk to Muggleton all the time. I talked to Muggleton 2 days ago.
Muggleton's the one that got me out of the 1500.
Yeah.
He had 48, 49, 400 speed.
Yeah. He ended up beating Craig Virgin in the 2 mile.
Wow.
He's insane. He's had an interesting life. I'm interviewing in about an hour and a half. I'm going to talk to a woman called Lorraine Moeller, who set national New Zealand records from 800 meters to the marathon. And she was part of this Boulder, Colorado group. Muggleton, Pete Lucas, a guy from New York, Steve Francis. And yeah, I talked to a lot of them now. So it's pretty interesting and pretty fun.
Yeah, I watched again. Thanks for doing this, Matt. It really, like I said, when I saw the Paul Martin, my first instinct was to call him up and talk to him for an hour.
That's the coolest thing. Thanks for your time, Tim.
See you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.